4 cosmonauts died in Soyuz 11. 4 men inside a metal capsule returning from the first space station. The date was June 30th, 1971. The official Soviet announcement was that the 3 cosmonauts aboard, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Oleg Patsayev, had died during re-entry. The cause was given as a sudden loss of cabin pressure. What was not mentioned was that the Soviet space program knew exactly what had caused the pressure loss. What was not mentioned was that the failure had been predicted. What was not mentioned was that the decision to launch without a critical safety system was made by engineers who understood the risk and proceeded anyway. This is the story of what the Soviet Union kept hidden about its space program. Not the famous disasters that everyone knows about, the ones that were covered up so completely that even now, more than 50 years later, the full truth has never been officially acknowledged. The greatest challenge the Soviet space program ever faced was not American competition, or technological limitations, or the vast distances of space. The greatest challenge was secrecy itself. The Soviet Union built an entire space program inside a system of classified research institutes, compartmentalized information, and deliberate misinformation. Scientists did not share data across facilities. Engineers did not know what other teams were building. The government did not acknowledge failures. The program did not publish results. And the consequence was that the Soviet Union won the first half of the space race through sheer determination and brilliant improvisation, then lost the second half because they could not learn from their mistakes fast enough. The first secret we are going to uncover is about the N-1 rocket. This was the Soviet equivalent to the Saturn V. This was the machine that was supposed to take Soviet cosmonauts to the moon before the Americans arrived. The N-1 had a power rating of 4.6 million kilograms of thrust at launch. It was the most powerful rocket the Soviet Union ever built. It was also the most comprehensive failure in the history of space exploration. 4 N-1 rockets were launched between 1969 and 1972. All 4 failed. All 4 explosions destroyed the launch facilities and set the Soviet moon program back by years each time. What was kept hidden was not the failures themselves, because those were impossible to hide. The explosions were visible to American satellites. What was kept hidden was why the rocket kept failing. The N-1 used 30 liquid-fueled engines clustered together in the first stage, 30 separate engines that had to fire in perfect synchronization. No Soviet test had ever successfully clustered this many engines. No computer existed that could monitor 30 separate engines simultaneously and adjust throttle for each one individually. The rocket was launched knowing that the engine clustering problem was unsolved. It was launched as an experiment. It was launched by engineers gambling that somehow 30 engines would work together, even though they had no reason to believe it would happen. Sergei Korolev was the chief designer of the Soviet space program. He was the man who built Sputnik. He was the man who launched Yuri Gagarin. He was the only person in the Soviet system who had enough political power to make decisions about what to build and when to launch. Korolev died on January 14, 1966, during surgery for colon cancer. The Soviet space program lost its only person who could make independent decisions. After Korolev died, the program fragmented. Different design bureaus, Chelomey, Glushko, Yangel, competed for resources and political favor. They did not share designs. They did not share failures. They did not cooperate. The Americans had Werner von Braun and the Saturn V program centralized under one authority. The Soviets had competing fiefdoms that sometimes worked on the same goals, without knowing what the others were doing. The N-1 program suffered because of this. Engineers at one facility did not know what other facilities were discovering about engine clustering. The engine synchronization problem that killed the N-1 program 4 times was something that could have been solved if the entire program had worked together. But the Soviet system of compartmentalization made that impossible. The second secret involves the Venera spacecraft. These were the most sophisticated planetary probes ever built at that time. Between 1961 and 1985, the Soviet Union launched dozens of Venera spacecraft to Venus. Some were designed to fly by, Some were designed to land and send back photographs from the surface. The Venera landers that successfully reached the surface of Venus and transmitted data revealed something shocking. Venus was far hotter than anyone had predicted. The surface temperature was approximately 462 degrees Celsius. The atmospheric pressure was 92 atmospheres. The clouds were made of sulfuric acid. Venus was not a sister planet to Earth as scientists had theorized. Venus was hell. The photographs from the Venera landers showed a barren, apocalyptic landscape of rock and desolation. But here is the secret that was hidden. The Soviet scientists who received the Venera data recognized something in those photographs that they did not report to the West. They saw evidence of what might have been water erosion patterns. They saw features that suggested Venus might once have had liquid water on its surface. They saw a world that might have been habitable billions of years ago, and then experienced a catastrophic greenhouse effect that boiled away the oceans and left behind the hell that Venera was observing. This interpretation was never published in the primary Venera papers. It was discussed internally. It was filed away. It was kept from the Western scientific community. Why? Because acknowledging that Venus had experienced a runaway greenhouse effect raised uncomfortable questions about Earth's future climate. The Soviet Union was not interested in publishing findings that suggested planetary climate could be destabilized by atmospheric changes. The third secret is about the space race itself. The Soviet Union claimed victory in the space race by launching the first satellite, sending the first man to space, achieving the first spacewalk, and landing the first probe on the moon. The United States claimed victory by landing men on the moon first. But the hidden competition that neither side publicized was about reconnaissance satellites. The Soviet Union was building space-based surveillance systems from the earliest days of the space program. Cosmos satellites were launched on a regular schedule. Officially, these were scientific research satellites. In reality, many of them were reconnaissance platforms. The Soviet Union was using space technology to watch American military installations, American naval movements, and American weapons development. The Americans were doing the same thing. Both powers kept this fact hidden from their own populations and from each other officially. The space race that the public saw, the dramatic competitions to reach space first, to walk on the moon, to achieve new records, was happening simultaneously with a completely separate and classified space race that was about military surveillance. The Soviets made advances in reconnaissance satellite technology that the Americans did not learn about until decades later. The Cosmos satellite constellation became more capable and more numerous than anything the Americans thought the Soviets could build, and this entire dimension of the space race was kept completely secret. The fourth secret involves the Soyuz spacecraft itself. This was the Soviet spacecraft design that carried cosmonauts to orbit. The Soyuz was built by Chelomey's Design Bureau. It was based on a design that predated Korolev's spacecraft concepts. It was less advanced in some ways than what Korolev had proposed, but it was what was available. So it became the Soviet spacecraft. The Soyuz had a fatal flaw that was known and accepted. The re-entry procedure required the spacecraft to separate into three modules: the orbital module, the descent module, and the service module. The pyrotechnic bolts that separated these modules sometimes failed to fire. If they failed to fire, the combined weight of the modules would create excessive heat during re-entry, and the spacecraft could be destroyed. This was known. This risk was accepted. Cosmonauts were launched knowing that their re-entry could be jeopardized if the separation bolts malfunctioned. Soyuz 11 had this problem. The separation bolts fired correctly, but the depressurization that occurred when the modules separated killed the three cosmonauts in the descent module before they re-entered the atmosphere. They died not in a catastrophic explosion, but in the cold darkness of space as the cabin pressure dropped. This was the first human death in space. It was covered up. The Soviet government did not acknowledge what had happened. The official story remained that the cosmonauts had died during re-entry. The actual cause, a design flaw that could have been mitigated by spacesuits, but the spacesuits had been removed to allow the crew to fit in the crowded Soyuz cabin, remained classified. Fast forward to the 1980s. The Soviet space program was still launching cosmonauts and space stations, still building spacecraft, still pushing the boundaries of what humans could do in space. But the program was fragmenting further. The Soviet economy was struggling. The space budget was being diverted to military projects. The civilian space program was being starved of resources. By 1989, the Soviet Union was in its final years. The space program that had achieved so much in the 1960s and 70s was becoming a shadow of what it had been. The final secret is about the last days of the Soviet space program. The transition from Soviet to Russian space programs was chaotic. Data was lost. Archives were scattered. Some facilities fell outside the borders of the newly independent Russia and became inaccessible. Some scientists emigrated. Some programs were simply abandoned. In the chaos of the Soviet collapse, there was opportunity to finally declassify some of the hidden history. But many documents remain classified even now. Many failures have never been fully explained. Many design decisions were never made public. The full truth about what the Soviet space program achieved and what it failed to do and why it failed remains partially hidden even today. The Buran space shuttle was the Soviet equivalent to the space shuttle. It was built in secret. It was launched once in 1988 in an unmanned test flight. It was never launched again. The program was abandoned. The Buran spacecraft itself was destroyed in a hangar collapse in 1994. Why was so much money spent on building an exact copy of the American space shuttle if the Soviet Union intended to abandon it? The answer that was hidden was that the Buran was built as a propaganda project. It was built to demonstrate that the Soviet Union could do anything the Americans could do. It was built to match the American capability, even if there was no clear use for it. It was a space program designed for an audience, not for science or for practical space activities. And this exposed something fundamental about how the Soviet space program operated in its later years. It was not being driven by scientific goals or exploration objectives. It was being driven by the need to maintain the appearance of Soviet technological superiority at any cost. The Mir space station was the crown jewel of the late Soviet space program. It was launched in 1986. It operated continuously until 1998. It was the first true space station with multiple modules that could be added over time. Cosmonauts lived aboard for months at a time. Scientific experiments were conducted. The Mir program proved that humans could live and work in space for extended periods. But the Mir was also a testament to how the Soviet system operated. The station was repeatedly on the verge of catastrophic failure. Water leaks threatened the crew. Fires broke out. Docking systems malfunctioned. Attitude control systems failed. The station should have been abandoned multiple times. But it was not abandoned because shutting it down would have meant admitting failure to the world. So the crew stayed aboard. They fixed the problems. They kept the station operational through sheer will and improvisation. The hidden truth about Mir was that it was kept alive by cosmonauts willing to accept risks that would have been considered unacceptable in any Western space program. The success of Mir came at the cost of willingness to expose the crew to danger. The most significant secret that the Soviet space program kept hidden was about the cosmonauts themselves. The Soviets announced and celebrated their space achievements, but they did not announce the cosmonauts who died in training. They did not announce the cosmonauts who were rejected from the program due to medical issues or political unreliability. They did not announce the cosmonauts who were selected for missions and then removed from the flight because of changing political priorities. The Soviet space program was selective in which cosmonauts it revealed to the world. Multiple cosmonauts trained for the first human spaceflight. Only Yuri Gagarin was announced as the first. Multiple cosmonauts were preparing for the first spacewalk. Only Alexei Leonov was announced. Multiple cosmonauts trained for the moon landing. None of them were announced because none of them ever flew. The Soviet system was designed to present the appearance of order and success, while hiding the reality of competition, failure, and constant struggle. The truly bizarre secrets of the Soviet space program are not about specific missions or specific failures. They are about how an entire organization operated under the constraint of secrecy. The Soviet space program achieved remarkable things because of brilliant scientists and determined engineers who were willing to take risks and solve problems under extreme pressure. The Soviet space program also failed in ways that were preventable because information was compartmentalized, failures were hidden, and learning from mistakes was made impossible by the need to maintain the appearance of success. The space race that the world watched was real. The American victory in the moon race was real. But the deeper story of the Soviet space program was about what happens when an organization cannot learn from its failures, because admitting failure is politically impossible. Today, the Russian space program operates under different constraints. The Cold War is over. The Soviet Union no longer exists, but many of the archives from that era remain classified or inaccessible. Many of the documents that would explain decisions and failures have never been released. Many of the cosmonauts who survived those years have passed away without telling their full stories. The complete history of the Soviet space program may never be known. What we do know is that the space program that could launch the first satellite and send the first human to space operated under a system that made it impossible to achieve its full potential. What we know is that brilliant people were constrained by a system that valued secrecy over truth. And what we know is that the most significant innovation of the Soviet space program may have been the innovation of hiding failures so completely that the world did not know how close the program came to catastrophe multiple times. What aspect of the hidden Soviet space program fascinates you most? Was it the failures that were covered up? The cosmonauts who were erased from history? The military surveillance systems that operated in parallel with the public space race? Tell me in the comments what secret you would like to explore deeper, and we will dive into the classified history of space exploration that shaped the world we live in today.